Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Heart UK's webinar on how to cook and eat with FCS, with a specific focus on South Asian meals. My name's Lynn Garton, and I'm the Dietetic Advisor at Heart UK, and I'm absolutely delighted to be coordinating today's events. But before we get started, I just wanted to emphasise that this event is specifically focusing on a condition called Familial Chylomicronaemia Syndrome, FCS for short, which is a rare genetic condition that results in very high triglycerides. FCS requires a very specific prescriptive diet, which is not relevant to the general dietary management of cholesterol. For this reason, if you thought we'd be discussing cholesterol today, the information that's going to be presented is not going to be appropriate for you. But talking today, it is got on FCS, and we have two fantastic speakers, and there will be the opportunity to ask questions. As everyone's on mute, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat facility to ask any questions. We can then address these questions after the two presentations. We'll also be posting any links that we feel might be useful to you in the chat facility. We are recording this event and we will put this on our website, so anyone who was unable to attend, or even if you want to listen to it again, you'll be able to watch there. So that's enough from the introductions. Let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Furman, who's a specialist dietitian at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust, to talk to you about the dietary recommendations for FCS. Over to you, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lynn. So as Lynn mentioned, I am going to be covering today the dietary management of Familial Chylomicronaemia Syndrome, or FCS. Today, we're going to be talking about what is a very low-fat diet and how do you fit important nutrients in when following a low-fat diet. I'll also discuss recommended portion sizes, thinking about key macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and provide an example of what a 15-gram fat restriction actually looks like. So the key principle or recommendation for FCS is to follow a very low-fat diet. This does vary from person to person, but for most people, it's less than 20 grams of fat a day. I believe we've got quite a good attendance from healthcare professionals as well, joining in on this presentation. So I thought I'd also include the recommendation, which is what's out there in the literature for FCS, and that is to restrict total fat to less, or between 10 and 15% of total calorie intake. So for someone, for example, on a 1,800 calorie diet, this could be between 20 or 30 grams of fat. However, this is normally our starting point, and once we have regular triglycerides, this normally needs to be adjusted, sometimes bringing restrictions down further to achieve an optimal triglyceride level. For some people, though, the fat restriction can be as low as 10 grams or less. The aim of a very low-fat diet is to reduce triglyceride levels, ideally down to less than 10 millimoles per litre, but even below 20 has a significant benefit in reducing acute pancreatitis, which is the aim of this treatment. On the picture here on the screen I've included is a blood sample for someone who has FCS, and as you can see in the portion of blood, there's a high amount of chylomicrons or triglycerides. If we think about the general population and then how food looks for someone on a very low-fat diet, for the general population, when we think about protein, carbohydrates, and fats, about 50% of calories are coming from carbohydrates, sometimes up to 35% of calories from fats, and around 15 to 20% from protein. This looks very different on a low-fat diet. When fat's needing to be restricted to around 10% of calories, the factors of protein and carbohydrate play a really big role in the diet. However, carbohydrates, if had in really big amounts, and we'll talk a bit more about this during the presentation, they can also increase triglycerides. So the current recommendation is for carbohydrates to be no more than 60% of calorie intake, which means that proteins play a really important role in a very low-fat diet, and we'll be touching on this more over my presentation. So what's the role of fat? Fat in the diet is important for giving that feeling of full or satiating, satiety after a meal, being satisfied with the meal that you've just had. It provides a really good source of calories and is also a source of essential amino acids and fat-soluble vitamins. So by restricting fat in the diet for FCS, there is a potential that people may struggle to feel full or satisfied after a meal. They may struggle to get enough calories, and also there could be a risk of not getting adequate essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins. So with needing to restrict fat, as I mentioned, proteins are really important in a very low-fat diet. Proteins can provide the role of feeling full or satisfied after a meal. They're really important in growth during childhood and adolescence and maintaining muscle mass throughout life. And they can also provide a good source of calories. So the types of protein foods we're thinking about are very low-fat, lean proteins. So this could be lean cuts of meat, such as turkey or chicken breast, egg whites. The egg yolk itself is very high in fat, but egg whites. Legumes such as lentils, chickpeas, pulses are a low-fat source. Soya chunks, tinned tuna and water, as well as a lot of the fat-free dairy options. So with protein playing such an important role in the diet, we do recommend that protein is included at every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks, thinking about what could be my protein, my lean protein element in that dish. Protein should make up at least a third of the plate and is recommended to be about a hand-sized serve. So your hand is a really good guide. It might be a chicken breast or a piece of white fish that fits within the hand. Or if you're thinking about legumes, at least what would be in a cupped hand size. Carbohydrates are the other important element. They too can be helpful for giving that sense of full, but they also are a really important fuel for the body. They are the preferred fuel for the body and specifically the brain. They come with calories and also provide a source of fiber. So some examples of carbohydrate foods, which are our starchy foods, could be things like brown rice, white rice, jacket potato, cassava, although this would need to be boiled rather than fried. So it was a low-fat carbohydrate option. Wholemeal bread, roti, naan, chapati, oats, Weetabix, just to name a few of them. With carbohydrates, the recommendations for FCS are to have a complex carbohydrates and for them to be limited in sugars. So what does this mean? The word complex is quite confusing, but we sometimes refer to carbohydrates as refined or complex. Refined being the more processed carbohydrates, where the wheat element, the fiber has been broken down, and that might be in white bread, white rice, white pasta, or in really high sugary foods. Where complex carbohydrates are the more grainy, whole grain, wholemeal options. So whole grain breads, oats, brown rice, for example. The challenge is that complex carbohydrates do tend to come with more fats than the refined. So it's important to balance that element. But if you're having a lot of refined carbohydrates or a lot of sugars, that in itself will push up triglycerides. So it really is important to include a source of carbohydrate, but to think about how that could be a complex version and fit within the fat allowance. Even foods that are naturally high in sugars, such as fruit juices or fruits, sometimes also need to be considered and limited. But carbohydrates are a really important part of the diet. They provide a really good source of calories, so they do need to be an element at every meal. The recommendation is for carbohydrates to make up a third of the plate. And again, if we're thinking about hand guide, a fist is a really good portion. Everyone's fist is slightly different, it's suited to them. And that might be a medium-sized jacket potato, or if you flip it round and think about what would fit in a cup hand serve, it might be your portion of rice or pasta. So what makes up the last element on a plate? Vegetables. Vegetables sometimes might not seem that exciting, but they are mostly very low in fat, with some exceptions, for example, like avocado, or if vegetables are in oil, like olives or sun-dried tomatoes. But majority day to day are very low in fat. They're a really good source of fiber, so they help with that feeling of full, and they provide a really good source of vitamins and minerals. So this element mustn't be forgotten on the plate. It should make up at least a third of the plate. Fruit is also an important element, but large amounts of fruit had regularly throughout the day can sometimes put quite a lot of sugar into the body, especially if it's had as fruit juice. So the recommendation is to include 2 portions of fruit a day. Your cupped hand being what would be 1 portion, for example, an apple or a handful of grapes, and aiming for around 2 of those a day as a recommendation, either as part of a meal or as a snack. You might have heard before of MCT, or medium chain triglycerides. They're also a really important element of an FCS diet. The benefit of MCT oil is that it bypasses the chylomicron-dependent pathway, which means that it absorbs differently in the body and doesn't rely on chylomicrons or increase in chylomicrons or triglycerides in the blood. So MCT does not impact on triglyceride levels. It's a really good way of getting calories if someone's needing that for growth. Or weight if they're underweight, but also if you're needing to shuffle the carbohydrate, protein, fat ratios in the diet. So if someone is needing a lot of carbohydrates to meet their calorie requirements, putting in a portion of MCT can be helpful. It is important, though, that MCT is medical grade. There is some MCT oils available online or from shops, but it is possible they might still contain some long-chain fats, which will affect your triglycerides. Sometimes people think of coconut oil as being an MCT source. Yes, it is high in MCT compared to some other oils, but it does still contain a portion of long-chain fats, and so will impact triglycerides if had in large amounts or even used regularly in cooking. So when it comes to MCT, it's important that it's a prescribed option. So talk to your dietitian or your doctor, your GP, about getting access to it. Because it's an oil, it can sometimes cause some stomach upset if it's had in large amounts quite quickly. So it's important to build up tolerance to MCT when you do start on it. As we'll talk more about cooking methods later in the presentation, but just to mention, it has a really low smoke point. So it's not a good oil for frying, but can be used during cooking or at the end. So what does a 15-gram fat restriction look like? Now, I mentioned at the start, for some people, the fat restriction is as low as 10 grams. For some, it's 20. I've gone with 15 just to give a middle point. And as you can see, fat adds up really quickly over the day. It's going to come in most food sources, and it is important to keep a monitoring of fat intake over the day to make sure that you are choosing food choices that fit within your fat allowance. So this is an example of someone who has used this diet menu, who's on around 15 grams of fat. And the examples that they might take in the morning is bran flakes with fat-free yogurt and a portion of fruit. So that's just over 2 grams of fat. At lunchtime, having a baked cod fillet, no oil, brown rice, and then a good portion of salad and vegetables, which is providing no additional fat if picking low-fat options. In the evening, they're having the chicken tikka pita pockets, which is a recipe from the book that will be discussed later, providing 7.6 grams of fat. And then snacks over the day, low-fat yogurts, Ryvita with chicken slices, light cream cheese. As I mentioned, protein is such an important element of the diet. And so across all these food options and snacks, you can see that protein is a feature, whether it's fat-free yogurt, cod, chicken, the cream cheese, or the chicken slices that are had as snacks. So we've talked a bit around the role of fat in terms of satiety and calories, and how with need to limit fat, those other elements, carbohydrates and protein, are really important. But what about essential fatty acid and fat-soluble vitamins? Essential fatty acids are omega-3 and omega-6. They're essential because the body can't make them. They need to be consumed through the diet. And they tend to come in higher fat foods, such as vegetable oils, nuts and seeds, oily fish, eggs, things that probably will not be a feature of an FCS diet. They are important, omega-3 and omega-6. They're involved in many functions in the body, eye, brain health, heart health, immune function, and reducing inflammation. It will depend on someone's fat restriction as to how much omega-3 they might be getting from the diet. It will differ between someone who is on less than 10 grams or someone who might tolerate 30 grams of fat. But it is really important to talk to your lipid team to monitor essential fatty acids and provide appropriate replacements or options that fit within your fat allowance or restriction. The other element is fat-soluble vitamins. Again, they play a really important role in lots of functions in the body, including eye, bone health, blood clotting, they're antioxidants. But fat-soluble vitamins are mostly found in high-fat foods, and they're absorbed better when you eat fat. So both of those elements are not going to be a big feature of an FCS diet when you're limiting fat and not going to be having a lot of fat at each of the meals. So these need to be monitored closely, and most likely people do need to be on vitamin replacement for these vitamins. Vitamin D doesn't tend to come from the diet. It's mostly from sunshine. And most people in the UK are low in vitamin D. So this should be supplemented as well. So again, speak to your doctor, your dietitian, making sure that you are on appropriate supplementation for fat-soluble vitamins. In addition to the recommendations I've discussed, it's also recommended with FCS to go alcohol-free. Alcohol itself increases triglycerides. And so even if someone is following a very low, very strict fat diet, even just the consumption of alcohol could push triglyceride levels up to a point where someone could get pancreatitis. So it is recommended to avoid alcohol, but alcohol-free alternatives are appropriate. Regular exercise is important, but this is the recommendation for everyone, the general population, aiming to get at least 150 minutes of movement per week. So just to summarize, the dietary recommendations, the key element is a very low-fat diet, but it does vary from person to person. It needs to be individualized based on someone's triglyceride levels. Lean and low-fat proteins are a really important part of the diet and need to be consumed at each meal. Trying to fit complex carbohydrates into your fat allowance is really important, and including them at each meal. MCT oil can be used, and you should talk to your team and your GP about getting this prescribed. And monitoring of essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins is really important. I thought I'd just bring up one slide around diabetes, because for some people are balancing both FCS and diabetes. Diabetes might be something that they've had from early age, or it could be the result of repeated episodes of pancreatitis causing some damage to the pancreas, and so its insulin production or its role in the body isn't working as well, and so someone might become insulin dependent. It's really important to link your FCS and your diabetes team, because sometimes the messages from both teams can be confusing or not aligned, and it's important that everyone's working together with the same goals and supporting you with the same goals to manage both those elements. Managing diabetes is really important because poorly controlled diabetes, high glucose levels, can also impact triglycerides and make it very hard to manage FCS. So optimizing your medications, working with your diabetes team to monitor glucose closely and get you on the right medication to support that is really important. Complex high fiber carbohydrates are a really important feature of diabetes, but they also align with FCS. So bringing both of those in is really important. And thinking about the portion of carbohydrates. So while carbohydrates are important at every meal, making sure you keep that first portion in mind can be really beneficial when balancing diabetes as well. Lean proteins, again, should be a feature of all meals, and keeping a healthy weight can help with management of diabetes. So the diet, as you all know, living with FCS or supporting someone with FCS is a very restrictive diet, and it needs to be followed every day. Even one meal that is higher in fat could lead to a big increase in triglycerides and an episode of pancreatitis. And living with these restrictions and needing to think about everything that goes into your mouth is incredibly challenging and tiring. And it's easy to get into a cycle of guilt of maybe not managing to make the right food choices, feeling that you've not been able to monitor the fats, feeling guilty around that and being really hard on yourself. So try break the cycle of guilt. Focus on what you can eat rather than what you can't eat. And it's really important to get support from others. Quite often in the clinic, we see the person who comes to clinic isn't always the person who is the cook in the home. So involving that person in the clinic and in the discussions and sharing of resources and information to make sure that everyone's there to support with the right meals is really important. and having a support person either at home or friends that you can share some of the challenges with, but it also encourages you to continue with all your efforts in managing your FCS is really important. Thank you for listening to me. That's the end of my presentation, and I'll pass you back to Lynn.
Thanks, Sarah. And what a fantastic overview. Really, really brilliant. Now I'm going to introduce you to Azmina Govinji, who's a fellow dietitian and author of the new Quick and Easy South Asian recipe book for FCS. And it's great to have you on board, Az, because we've heard about the kind of the principles, what the dietary recommendations are, and now we're going to talk about how we can put that into practice. So we've heard about the dietary recommendations for FCS. How easy do you think it is to implement this into the South Asian diet?
Yeah, it may sound like something that's not easy, but I think the first thing to think about is that the traditional South Asian diet can actually be very healthy. If you think about all the pulses, the lentils, different types and colors of lentils, beans, wholemeal atta for roti or chapati, basmati rice, these are all actually really healthy ingredients. It depends on your portion size, of course, and the way that you're cooking it. But as a dietitian working with South Asian people, I think it's really important to maintain that delicious culture and cuisine and authenticity. So I really believe that you can have all the beautiful elements of traditional South Asian eating, but modifying cooking methods and recipes a little bit so that we make sure we're keeping to the FCS eating plan that Sarah spoke about.
Fantastic. And so in the culture, eating as part of with the family is really, really important. So how do you think somebody who's got FCS can still eat the same foods as everyone else if it's sitting down at the meal together?
That's a really interesting question, because it's family and hospitality are really part of who we are, our identity. I mean, I've been brought up in the UK, and yet still, I will go to mum-in-laws and have meal around a table, and there's all this deliciousness in the middle, and we all just serve ourselves. So this is just how a lot of us will eat. And there's nothing wrong with that. What is important, though, with FCS, as Sarah outlined, is that for the person with FCS, we have to be really careful about cutting down on fat. Now, when you look at traditional South Asian eating, think of samosas and all those beautiful snack foods. Think of the fact that a curry is usually fried. You have the onions and you have the spices that are fried at the beginning of the recipe, and then you add all the other ingredients. So oil, fat, ghee, butter are all part of traditional South Asian cooking. So there does need to be some modification, but I believe it's possible. And it took me a while, but all the learning I've put into this book, which you mentioned in the beginning, and these recipes are all quick and easy South Asian recipes, which are quite, sorry, I'm just trying to find one there, quite mouth-watering recipes, which actually do allow you to enjoy the deliciousness and the authenticity of our own culture, our own cuisine, but with modification. Now, you mentioned that, well, how do we eat as a family? Because obviously the whole family doesn't want to have 0 or 0.5 grams of fat in their serving. They may not need to. So what I've tried to do within this recipe book is to show how you can cook a meal for everybody, which is low in fat to start with, very low in fat. Now, it's all been nutritionally analyzed. So you and your own dietitian can look at the amount of fat per serving. But then for the rest of the family, there's nothing stopping you adding a bit more rapeseed oil, let's say, into a curry, or doing a tarka for a dal and adding the tarka to that portion. So there are ways to actually eat the same basic meal as a family in the center of the table, as long as your portion is served a little bit separately, and you can enjoy side dishes as long as they're not high in fat either. Think things like 0% fat Greek yogurt, a delicious mint and coriander chutney. So there are ways for you to fully participate in even celebrations. But what I'm basically talking about is everyday eating in a very simple way, by making sure your portion is lower in fat and you can still have the same food for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, the cookbook is fantastic, and it looks that the recipes, they are amazing. And we have the cookbook, which you can download from our website. So we will put the link to the recipe book in the chat facility. But it's not just for, it's for anybody who enjoys the South Asian cuisine. And you talk about the oils. Now, can you just say a little bit about the oils that you use when you were developing the recipes in the cookbook?
Sure. So as Sarah mentioned, there is a particular oil that you can get on prescription. This is it, MCT oil. And you must make sure you use prescription grade only. And the reason for that is that you might find this online, but many of them will also have coconut oil within them. I'll talk about coconut oil in a little while, but make sure you get prescription grade only. However, when I look at this bottle and I think of my mum's cooking, there is no way she's going to say, oh yeah, I'll just use that in my pilau dish. It's just so alien. And I've found this with many of my South Asian clients that, you've got to keep as close to traditional, in fact, for anyone really, you want to keep as close to your usual recipes, your usual food preferences and likes and dislikes. So we tend to, have a big bottle of oil and pour straight from that container when we make a curry, and that's just how we cook. I actually decant mine into a measure bottle so that I can control it a little bit. But with FCS, you obviously can no longer do that, and it's really important. So you need to start measuring. And because it's such a small amount of fat, that's where MCT can be useful. But I must admit, when I was creating the recipes, I found it quite difficult to use MCT because of what I said in the beginning, which is how curries and other Asian dishes are cooked. And you can't use MCT oil at very high temperatures. So if you think about that frying of onion and spices, it's just not going to work. So within the recipes, I've just suggested you use your ordinary oil. I use rapeseed oil. Measure it's usually a teaspoon or 2 for a serving for, let's say, 4 people. And you can still do the basic cooking. But the value of MCT oil, I think, is that often when people cut down on their fat intake, you're also cutting down on calories, and many will lose weight. And we want to make sure we get enough calories just for good energy levels. And the value of the MCT oil is that it's a type of fat that you can have and not mess up your FCS diet. So what I suggest you do is to add MCT oil to your serving at the end of cooking if you want to. And there are a couple of recipes, actually, I think I've got, yeah, here we go. This is a tandoori chicken recipe, which is really delicious, and it's char grilled. And what I did was I brushed everybody else's portion with ordinary vegetable oil, but on the portion for the person with FCS, I brushed it with MCT oil. It grilled very nicely and it tasted really good. So there are ways for you to use MCT oil perhaps at the end of cooking. I'd also suggest you can use it in salad dishes like kachumber, which is that lovely traditional onions and tomatoes and cucumbers, a bit of chili and oil and lemon. So you can actually use it raw in that way, and it actually doesn't taste of anything. So it does work once you get over the fact that it's white or colorless and it's in this bottle. So yes, I think there are ways around it. And one of the recipes that I'm pretty proud of is this zero oil masala. So, as I said in the beginning, we tend to fry our onions and spices, and then you might add tomatoes and other ground or whole spices. But actually, there is a dish that I've created in here, which is a zero oil masala. It's basically where you use pureed onions and tomatoes and your spices, and that way you've got a base for all sorts of curries, like a fish curry or a chicken curry or any of vegetables or even dal if you want to. So you've managed to find a way to not add any oil, and you've still got the same basic meal as everybody else. So that's one of the oils that we can use. The The other ones are spray oil. So you might have seen these in the supermarket. One spray is just 0.1 grams of fat. So you might want to use, say, 10 sprays, not 10 grams. That might be a daily intake. 10 sprays of the oil for the base of curries.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned about coconut oil as, could you just talk a little bit about coconut oil? And sometimes, as Sarah mentioned, it can be considered a source of MCT, but I don't know if you want to talk about your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, when you listen to the radio channels, which many South Asian people do listen to in the daytime when they're cooking, for example, you will hear adverts of coconut oil being super healthy and much better for you. And they may have captions like cholesterol free. Well, actually, all oils are cholesterol free, so that's not the issue. The issue for FCS is the amount of fat and a particular type of fat. And coconut oil is mainly saturated and LCT, which is not the type of fat you want to be having. And that's why earlier on, both myself and Sarah mentioned that make sure if you're using MCT, make sure it's prescription grade only. So don't get sucked into the advertising. It's not a good idea to use coconut oil. Stick to your ordinary vegetable oil with the amounts that's recommended by your own dietitian. The recipes will help you, or have your prescription grade MCT.
Perfect. And are there any specific oils, types of oils that you'd recommend that you used in your recipe book?
So I use rapeseed oil, and the reason for that is that it's a healthier oil, a bit like olive oil. But it doesn't have any strong flavor. Sometimes olive oil in South Asian cooking imparts a flavor, whereas rapeseed oil works really well, works well at high temperatures. So I use rapeseed oil, but actually you could use a vegetable oil. Just remember to keep to your own eating plan as prescribed by your dietitian. And within the book, each recipe is analyzed, so you know how much fat is in there.
Thank you. And what about walnut oil? Did you want to mention a little bit about walnut oil?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good one, because a teaspoon of walnut oil a day will give you the amount of omega-3 that you need. Now, omega-3 is something that you need to make sure you're having regularly, daily. And within the FCS diet plan, it's actually quite difficult because you can't eat, for example, oily fish, which is one of the richest sources of omega-3. But if you can have a teaspoon of walnut oil, let's say drizzled onto your salad or your kachumber, or even after you've created your own meal, drizzle a bit of walnut oil. Remember to count that within your fat allowance. 1 teaspoon has about 3 grams of fat. Then that's a really good way to get your omega-3 fats.
Perfect. Thank you. So when you were sort of deciding on creating the recipes and thinking about and considering what you were going to make, why did you choose the recipes that you did for your recipe book?
Well, when I first started to look at this, I thought it was almost impossible to do this project. But I do like a good challenge. So the first thing that was important to me was the quick and easy. Because do you know what? I don't have much time, and who does these days? So it had to be quick and easy, and the recipes had to be as close to authentic traditional eating as possible. But what I also wanted to do, so as well as sort of quick and easy, this is a 10-minute kidney bean curry, for example. As well as that, I wanted to reflect what most of us are eating today. So although we've got those traditional recipes, we've also got things for lunch, say a mixed bean salad, some sort of fusion dishes. I think in here I've got, tuna and cheese quesadillas, which I quite surprised myself on this one. It's a special cheese, and I show you in the book how to get that type of cheese. Obviously, ordinary cheddar would not work. It is a particular cheese which is available in the supermarkets. But like I said, it was this sort of fusion. So although you've got your traditional dal and chickpea curry and all the rest of it, you've also got dishes that you might be able to cook in an air fryer, for example, cook in a microwave, cook very quickly as a stir fry. So I wanted to make sure it was appropriate for anyone who just enjoys a bit of spice and wants to keep to a flavoursome eating plan for FCS.
Yeah, perfect. And the reason why I really like the book is because it is a fusion. You're already talking about some ways to incorporate, for example, the MCT oil, which people may not have considered. So that it's just such a fantastic resource. And now we're going to see you in action making a recipe from the book, the ribbon rice pilau, which has got it's got less than 1 gram of fat per serving. So we'll put this video on now. Oh,
Are we sure the sound is on?
Yeah, we don't think we've got the audio on. There any audio on this? We need
I can't hear the audio either.
No, I can't hear it. I'm going to try again. No, there's still no audio, which is a shame because it was working perfectly in practice. I think we might have to give. Can you hear it, Asmina?
No sound.
No, I don't think we can hear it. I think we might have to give up on this one. We'll try. We've got another video to watch, so we might try the second video and see if we can get the sound sorted. But I don't know if you talk us through how did you make it? That might be a good idea. It's just so to explain how you got it so low in fat.
Sure. So with a pilau rice, I mean, every grain is coated in oil generally. So it's a very rich dish, but I had the challenge of doing it without the oil. And I think the best way to do it is actually, I used a microwave. You could do this on the hob. And it was basically any vegetables you've got lying around. So let's say shredded cabbage, shredded carrots. That's where the ribbon idea came from. And a handful of frozen vegetables with your basmati rice and lots of delicious aromatic spices. And if you just pop that into a rice cooker or even just a bowl with a plate on top as a lid and pop that into the microwave for about half an hour, test it, add a bit of water if you need to, add some more chili if you need to, and then serve it. What you end up with is a very colorful dish that looks like that. And it literally doesn't need any time. It took me about 5 minutes to do the chopping and then I left it, just threw it all together. But I think it's a really good addition to other dishes. It's quite low in carb because you've got more vegetables than you have rice. It's definitely virtually fat-free, and it tasted quite good.
Brilliant. And do you know what? You make the recipes look so easy when you're talking through them, watching the videos. But what were some of the challenges that you sort of came across when you were creating those recipes, and what did you do to overcome them?
So, I mean, as I said in the beginning, it's really difficult to make an authentic South Asian meal without fat. I mean, it's just that delicious oily orange layer on the top, or those crispy pakora or samosas or deep fried puris or that sort of thing. So that's what we eat and that's what we enjoy. But when you realize how important it is to cut down on fat for FCS and how crucial that is, you've got to think about that's the primary objective here. You don't want symptoms, you don't want pancreatitis. And if that's the primary objective, we've got to look at how can we still enjoy our food, because food is for enjoyment. I'm not anticipating we're going to start eating boiled curries or Western cuisine. You've got to embrace your own traditional foods. So I needed to try and find a way to do that with less fat. So it needed different cooking methods, like the microwave, like the air fryer, like brushing with oil, a little bit of oil later on, and finding other ways to get flavor in, different ways of actually making sure you're enhancing flavor so you don't need to add fat.
And so you talk about flavor. What did you do to sort of create the flavor if you're taking away the fat? What sort of tips could you give?
So garlic, ginger, and chilies are like staples in Asian cuisine. And I must admit, I've bought the garlic and ginger in jars or the ones that you can buy frozen, and they're okay. But what I chose to do for the recipes, just to get that extra flavor, was to have fresh ginger, fresh garlic, and fresh chilies. But I wrote this book over a few months, and I'm not going to do that every day. So I pureed them, put them into ice cube trays, and froze them. And therefore, it makes it so much easier. So when I started to create a recipe, I would just take an ice cube block of fresh garlic, fresh chili, fresh ginger. Obviously, you can use less or more as you like. There was no fat in them. And then that way you're getting a really fragrant, fresh flavor to your dishes. The other thing I suggest, and this is if you have time, is to grind or roast your own spices. Now that my mum does this, but I honestly don't have time. But I did the recipes because I just wanted to find a way to get that extra flavor. So dry roasting cumin seeds and coriander seeds, for example, grinding them myself, and then you can put a massive amount into an airtight jar. And when you buy, we call this dana you'll see that on the label. It's basically ground. Dana is coriander, so ground coriander. Jeera is cumin, so ground cumin. And when you buy that in the shops, you're only getting about 20% cumin, whereas if you roast it at home and you grind it at home, I recommend you do 50-50, and you'll see the difference in the flavor.
Wow.
So sort of thing I did. I charred dishes, etc., to make sure that we were going to get lots of flavor in there.
Well, we've talked a lot about savoury foods. What about the sweet dishes? Do they need to be modified in any way for FCS?
So ideally, you want to be basing your sweet taste on fruits, so fresh fruits. There's a lovely fruit chaat in the recipe book, which if I can find it, I can even show you, which is basically delicious fresh fruits, tropical fruits, and then a bit of chaat masala on there and mint, which is delicious. And I think it's possible to use ordinary fruit and find ways to enhance them. So to get that flavor hit, for example, you can just take a beautiful large orange, slice it, drizzle of honey, maybe some cinnamon, put that under the grill. And if you char it under the grill, you get that umami flavor, which is really adding a depth of flavor, and you don't need to add lots of sugar. The other one that I like, which is charred, is these sauteed bananas, because if you imagine putting bananas into a frying pan with some orange zest, and then you put them on there for a while, they start to char and go all gooey and warm, and they release even more sugar. But that's very, very delicious, warm, with some 0% fat Greek yogurt. So although sugar does need to be limited in FCS, I think there are ways for you to use fruit to get that sweet taste.
And now, if we can get the videos working, we're going to see how you put together one of these sweet dishes, which are your raspberry cheesecakes. So let's see, fingers crossed. This isn't still not working. No, I think technology has let us down on this occasion. But maybe again, could you talk us through how you created that? Because that again looks a fantastic recipe.
Sure. And maybe one thing we can mention is that when this video is, am I right, when it's on the Heart UK site, those recipe videos will also be incorporated, and then you can hear the sound.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. So anyone who really wants to see the recipes step by step, go back onto the Heart UK site once there is notification that it's online, and you can see them. But for now, this is the raspberry cheesecakes. And if you think about a cheesecake, it's usually got that digestive biscuit crumb, and it's very high in fat, not only from the biscuits, but from butter that you've added to that. And obviously that would not be appropriate, and you don't want to be going there anyway. So instead of that digestive biscuit layer, I've used a pineapple ring. So that's the base. And within the creamy, cheesy layer, there is a 0% fat fromage frais, which you can buy in the supermarket. But in order to enrich that, I've actually incorporated something called MCT Pro-Cal, which you can get on prescription. And this is a powder which tastes of nothing, just a white powder, but it's really good at thickening. So it thickened the fromage frais. So you've got that sort of thick, cheesy layer, which you put onto the pineapple ring, and then some fresh raspberries and mint on top. And that was a really good way to have a delicious dessert, which is a bit of a cheats version of a cheesecake.
Fantastic, thank you, Az. And the recipe book it's such a great resource for somebody who's got FCS. It's really practical, really helpful. As you say, there's quick dishes, and it's dishes that the whole family can enjoy. And we've got 3 copies of the hard copies of the recipe book that we are going to be giving away to 3 lucky people who are attending the webinar today. So we'll notify you if you're one of those lucky people by email afterwards. But I really appreciate all what you've done, Azmina, and I think, as I say, it's such a great resource, and it's now, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. So if I can invite Sarah back, we have got some questions come through and the Q&A. So let's so I don't, well, maybe to both of you, what is your advice to patients who often eat out and reliant on takeaways and require a very low fat diet?
Would you like me to start, Az? This is a really challenging area for people, because you can read menus, but you also have to trust that they then understand the information. And sometimes when you talk about a very low fat diet, people think you're doing a healthy diet and might not factor in things like be thinking about the oils or the avocado or foods, other fats that people might consider heart healthy, but they're not actually appropriate for FCS. So this is really challenging. In terms of recommendations, I think planning ahead, looking at what the menus a place has to offer. If you can call them and explain, that is brilliant. There are some cuisines that tend to be sometimes lower fat, but they can still be hidden fats. I think one of my recommendations would be people do live busy lives, and you do want convenience foods, and you do want to be able to have things to grab on the go, or if you are need to rely on takeaways, link in with the dietitian. We do a lot of discussing around this with people living with FCS to understand what are your food choices, because that can vary a lot, and what does convenience mean to you, and trying to see if we can find the best scenario. But it is an incredibly challenging area. I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
So maybe some specific ideas. When you go out, let's say, to an Indian restaurant, the papadums are often fried, but actually raw papadums are quite low in fat, and I would recommend that you ask for them to be grilled. And as Sarah said, I think phoning up in advance, or maybe even getting to the restaurant a bit earlier to speak to the chef and explaining that you're on this restricted diet for health, not for healthy eating, but actually for a health condition, then, hopefully they will be sympathetic. So to insist that, say, papadums are fried. The other thing to note is that the good news about an Indian salad generally is that they do not add an oily dressing. So they're usually dressed in a bit of salt, a bit of lemon juice or vinegar. Check again, but you can at least fill up on lots of carrots and cucumber and onion and tomato, which usually does not have any oil. I think also accompanying your dishes with a yogurt. Now, again, you need to check, but mostly the yogurt that would be served in these restaurants are from a starter culture, and that yogurt is made at home rather than bought. And when it is, it's usually quite low in fat. Obviously, you need to check that, and if you don't trust them, don't go there. You could actually even take your own 0% fat. I've done that before, into the restaurant and asked, is it okay if I have this yogurt? And the reason why I mention the 0% fat Greek yogurt is it's a good source of protein too. You can be guaranteed you've got no fat in there. And again, protein helps to fill you up. So if you're feeling a bit deprived when everybody else is having those orange oily layers on their food, you're actually then still having a plate of food just as delicious, and making sure that you're getting some protein so you're filled up. The other thing to think about is naan or naan bread or roti. Again, they're very good at not spreading any butter or ghee on top of there if you don't want it and if you request it. So again, speaking to them and being very clear that this is important. And you'll know when it arrives if it's got any fat on top of it. And then that can be your portion. Everybody else can have their butter or ghee on top. And the other thing is to go for dishes that are cooked in the tandoor. So chicken tikka. I wouldn't go for lamb or beef kebabs, but chicken would be a good idea. Do not go for paneer. Often paneer, which is a full fat, soft cheese, it's often advertised in brackets as cottage cheese on an Indian restaurant menu. It is not cottage cheese, it's low fat, soft cheese. The reason why it's so delicious is because it's fat and try it. So steer clear of the paneer, but actually chicken tikka done in the tandoor. And again, ask for your portion not to be brushed with oil. If it's just steeped in the yogurt and the marinade, that would generally be fine, but be careful that you've checked it first.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question now. Talking about cottage cheese, because of course you can get the fat-free cottage cheese. Do you think if you mix the MCT Pro, because you were saying with yogurt, it gave that lovely creamy taste. I wonder if it would work with cottage cheese and making it a sort of much sort of thicker, creamier cottage cheese.
Oh, I think that's worth a try.
Just thought about that.
That's a lovely idea because cottage cheese is a bit watery, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And then so it would certainly thicken the liquid parts of it. You've got to still get used to the texture, but there might be a way to try that. You could maybe even cook with that. I wonder.
Yeah.
Worth a try.
Worth a try. Okay, as you mentioned about the oil spray, and we've had a question. Do you recommend the oil spray? I think this is what the question means, instead of pouring oil, and how safe is the spray compared to the normal pouring oil?
So if you look at the label, a lot of them are just made with the same oil that you would have bought, say, rapeseed oil, etc. So you just use it it's better to use a spray because then you're limiting your intake. But if you're worried about it, what I suggest you do is you buy the oil that you enjoy, let's say a rapeseed oil, and then you put it into a spray bottle, and they're very quick and cheap and easy to get online. And then that way, you know that you're spraying your own oil and there's no additives and preservatives, and you can maybe feel more virtuous doing that. The only thing I cannot guarantee is that one spray then is the amount of fat that's in the spray that's in the spray can that you would have bought. I don't know if Sarah's got any thoughts on what one spray would be. I'm sure it varies depending on the spray bottle you've bought, but certainly better than pouring straight from the bottle.
Yeah. Any further comments, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. It's tend to be the same fat. I think the benefit of spray is that it can do a good coverage on a food with a smaller amount. But yeah, I think every spray bottle will have a slightly different amount of oil that would come out every time. So it'd be quite hard to quantify, but some of the bought ones will say one spray is equal to this amount of fat. So you can kind of guarantee it with the sprays. Okay. One thing I would just mention on the topic of oils as well is it's really important to keep measuring oils when you're cooking these recipes, because as you enjoy them and you get familiar with them, sometimes it's easy to start sort of guesstimating amounts of oils, and portions can sometimes alter or become a little bit more. But while oils are part of these recipes, the amount and the measure is so important, because it could be every extra 1 or 2 grams of fat can add up a lot for someone with FCS. So good to keep the tablespoons, the teaspoons out on the bench and measuring those oils when you're cooking with them.
Okay, lovely, thank you. There's a question here as well. Should avocado be avoided?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so that's a blanket, avoid avocado.
Yeah. Avocado is a really high fat food, and if you were limiting to a 10 or even 20 gram fat allowance, it would use up quite a few grams of that portion. So I would recommend avoiding it. If it was really important to your diet, again, you could work with your dietitian and see how it would factor into the day, but it would be quite a small serve because it is a very oily vegetable.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question about walnut oil. So does heat damage or nullify the omega-3 content in the walnut oil? And can you fry with walnut oil similar to rapeseed oil at higher temperature?
That's a very good question. In terms of heating, denaturing the omega-3s, I don't actually know the answer to that, to be honest. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Lynn or Az. Normally, we advise walnut oil to be, if it's uses an omega-3 source, to be added as a dressing or to stirred into food at the end of cooking.
Yeah, no, that's what we would recommend as well. I think it's not to do with the denaturing of the actual omega-3. It's about the smoke point that it would reach at lower heat. So it's best to use it, as you say, in a dressing. Well, that's my thoughts. I don't, Az, have you got any other thoughts?
Yeah, actually, walnut oil may not lend itself well anyway to South Asian flavors. And I would agree that it's best to have it raw on top of, once you've cooked, just drizzle your 1 teaspoon or put it onto a salad or whatever. I would not recommend you use it as the base of cooking a curry or a dal dish or a rice dish. I think it's always, and also you don't want to be having more than what you need. And I think it's really important to make sure you've measured. And I really would like to echo Sarah's point about measuring, because she's so right that you get so used to it. You say, I can't be bothered getting the teaspoon out, but actually get a measuring teaspoon, not even a teaspoon that's in your cutlery drawer, because I've got 3 different sizes of teaspoon. So actually using a measuring teaspoon, and keep using it so that you are I mean, within the recipes, they are meticulously organized in terms of fat. The spices you can go wild with, but actually the fat content, it's so important to measure with a measuring spoon.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I jump on there too? Sorry, Lynn, just to mention on the walnut oil. So while walnut oil is a really good source of omega-3, omega-6, it is still a fat that will affect triglycerides. So again, sorry, I keep coming back to talking with a dietitian or your team. Just make sure how it fits into your overall diet, because we want to give you the littlest amount you need to have the benefit in terms of omega-3s. And there might be another option out there that you can get a more concentrated form of omega-3 and omega-6 for a lower amount of fat. So 1 teaspoon of walnut oil can be 3 to 5 grams of fat. So it could use up quite an amount of your total fat allowance. So yeah, talk with your team about that one.
Thank you. And I think there's been a question about any tips for FCS and CKD diets. I don't think that's a very specific question, Sarah. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
I think it also comes down to linking the 2 teams together, right. Similar to diabetes, because both have their own dietary guidance, and sometimes they don't always complement each other. So you know, depending on the type of CKD, chronic kidney disease someone has, the nutrition requirements do change if they're at end stage chronic kidney disease or in the early stages. A lot of the time it is more around protein, but sometimes these higher protein, lower fat diets for FCS are higher in protein. So I think it will need to be done with the 2 specialist teams coming together and working with the individual with the FCS to make sure that they're given clear messages that align across the 2 different conditions.
Okay. There's another question about what to do when triglyceride level is 33 millimoles. Any thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah. So that level is putting someone at risk of pancreatitis. So if that is your level, and if you do have any signs of abdominal pain, the safest thing is to present to A&E and be assessed and contact your lipid team. It's the most important thing, and they will put you on. They can then link in. The lipid team can link in with the medical team and make sure you're on the right treatment, but it tends to involve a period of fasting and trying to crash down those triglycerides. So yeah, important to update your lipid team if you've got levels above 20, especially if you've got any abdominal pain.
Perfect, thank you. Well, look, it's nearly coming up to the hour. So before everybody goes, I just want to run a poll, which is a couple of questions to ask, you know, whether you enjoyed it, whether you learned something new, because this really helps us develop further webinars, further resources. So if you could answer the first question, did you enjoy the webinar? Yes, no, not sure. It'd be great to have that one answered. And whilst we're just filling in these 2 questions, I just want to say thank you so much to Sarah and Azmina for such a great session. It worked really well. We had you know, what the actual advice is and then how you can put that into practice. Some real great top tips, Yasmina, from, you know, how to get to a low-fat diet but still enjoy the lovely tastes, and specifically for sort of the South Asian cuisine and the South Asian community as well. And I highly recommend the book. So we're just going on to the second question, and I'm sure everybody will agree that the information that you presented was so super helpful, and yeah, I'm sure everybody will agree with that. And so that leaves me to say thank you very much. I think if we finish the last poll question, yeah, that's it, it's finished. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Yasmina, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.